For the longest time, a lot of Caitlin Clark fans felt like they were watching two completely different realities at once. On one side, they were seeing sold-out arenas, record-breaking TV ratings, road crowds showing up in fever gear, and a rookie who instantly became the center of the WNBA conversation. On the other side, they were listening to league leadership act like none of it was really about one player. Now that has changed, and not by accident. Cathy Engelbert has finally gone on national platforms and openly said what many people believe the league have been avoiding for 2 straight years. Caitlin Clark is the biggest star in the WNBA. And at the exact same time, the new collective bargaining agreement has put real officiating accountability into the system after 2 seasons of complaints, missed calls, and visible frustration. Those 2 things are connected more than people want to admit. What makes this whole shift so striking is that it did not happen because the commissioner suddenly woke up with a new perspective. It happened because the league could no longer keep pretending Clark's impact was just one piece of a bigger, equal puzzle. For a while, that was clearly the messaging strategy. Keep talking about the league as a collective product. Keep framing growth as a broad movement. Keep leaning on rivalry talk. Keep avoiding any suggestion that one player had become too central to the business side of everything. From a corporate point of view, that probably felt safer. But sports do not always behave like a boardroom presentation. Sometimes one player changes the temperature of the entire league so dramatically that denying it starts to look ridiculous. That was the issue from the beginning. Clark arrived from college with a level of national attention women's basketball had never seen at that scale. Her college run shattered viewership expectations, and that momentum did not disappear when she got drafted. It followed her straight into the WNBA. Suddenly, people who had never watched the league before were buying tickets just to see Indiana. Teams that had no reason to expect major gates were seeing attendance spikes when the fever came town. Broadcast numbers jumped in obvious ways. The change was not subtle. It was measurable. And because it was so measurable, fans got annoyed every time league leadership tried to flatten it into a generic message about the game growing as a whole. One of the earliest moments that really stuck with people was that national television interview where Engelbert gave the now infamous line about no league being about one player. What made it land so badly was not just the sentence itself. It was the tone around it. It felt like the commissioner was trying to downsize the importance of the one athlete who was obviously driving a huge percentage of the new attention. The comment came at a time when Clark had become the clearest commercial engine the league had ever had. And instead of leaning into that, the response sounded cautious, almost offensive. It felt less like celebration and more like risk management. And that is probably what it was. Engelbert did not come up through basketball operations. She came from the corporate world, where protecting the institution from overdependence on one asset is standard thinking. In that environment, it makes sense to spread credit, avoid making one figure too important, and never let a single person appear bigger than the brand. But sports are not accounting firms. If one athlete is the reason your buildings are filling up, your ratings are exploding, your sponsors are expanding interest, and your relevance is rising with casual audiences, pretending that athlete is just another part of the machine stops looking disciplined and starts looking dishonest. The handling of Clark's Rookie of the Year moment only made those feelings stronger. Fans remember that clearly because it felt small, for the player who had just transformed the league's visibility. The acknowledgement came in a way that many people saw as underwhelming. Then later, a similar award situation involving a different player was handled with more ceremony and more visible respect. That contrast did not go unnoticed. It added to the feeling that Clark was being used to grow the league, while not always being treated like the face of that growth when official moments came around. Then there was a rivalry framing, which created even more tension. Instead of dealing head-on with concerns about hard fouls, uneven officiating, and player protection, the messaging often shifted toward how heated rivalries are good for the sport. That sounded exciting on paper, but many fans saw a huge difference between a true rivalry and repeated physical targeting that was not being consistently addressed by referees. Calling everything good for ratings is easy until the league's most watched player is repeatedly taking contact and not getting the whistle. At that point, the marketing spin starts to feel reckless. That was one of the biggest breaking points in this whole saga. People were not just upset because Clark was being hit. They were upset because the pattern seemed to go unanswered. Fever coach Stephanie White started publicly referencing free throw disparities and game management issues in a way that made it impossible to dismiss as random fan emotion. When a head coach begins putting those numbers on the record, that tells you frustration has moved beyond normal post-game complaining. It means someone inside the league is trying to establish that this is not one bad night. It is a pattern, and fans had the clips too. There were moments that traveled everywhere because they were so hard to explain away. Plays where Clark clearly took serious contact and the whistle never came. Sequences where she looked stunned, frustrated, or flat out hit with no meaningful response from officials. That is why the refs' are human explanation did not satisfy anybody. Of course referees are human. Everybody knows that. But that line sounds empty when the problem is no longer about a single bang-bang call and has become a season-long discussion about how the league's biggest draw is being officiated. That is where the new collective bargaining agreement becomes such a major part of the story. Because now, for the first time, there is real structure around officiating transparency and review. The agreement requires formal meetings between the league and the players' union specifically to review technical and flagrant foul decisions. That matters a lot. It means controversial calls and non-calls are no longer floating in the air as social media arguments. They now move into scheduled, documented review spaces where patterns can be discussed formally. Even more important, the union now gets access to the officiating emphasis materials that referees use. That may sound small to casual fans, but it is actually huge. Before this, a lot of officiating lived in a kind of black box. Players and teams could feel that something was off without fully knowing what instructions refs had actually been given. Now, there is more visibility. If referees are told to emphasize certain kinds of contact, and then those exact kind of contact keep getting ignored in games, it becomes easier to identify whether the issue is interpretation inconsistency or simple failure. That is how accountability starts. Not with one dramatic firing or one angry press conference, but with a system that forces patterns into the open. Once that happens, the officials who repeatedly cannot handle high-profile games or consistently miss major calls stop blending into the background. They become visible. And when performance becomes visible inside a structured review process, the league eventually has to act. That is why so many Clark fans looked at the new CBA and felt like this was one of the first truly meaningful changes to come out of all the frustration. And that takes us back to Engelbert's new tone. Because suddenly, after the CBA is signed and the league's financial growth is locked into a more serious framework, the commissioner is publicly calling Clark the biggest star in the league. Not one of the biggest. Not a key part of a larger story. The biggest star. That is not a minor wording change. That is a total repositioning. It is the kind of statement people have been waiting to hear for a long time, especially from someone who had previously sounded so careful about not centering the league around Clark. The reason the change feels so revealing is because Clark herself did not suddenly become more important overnight. She was already driving the attention. She was already moving the ratings. She was already filling the arenas. She was already doing the media work, the national appearances, the road turnout, and the style of basketball that made fans tune in. None of that is new. The only thing that changed is that the league now has stronger financial reasons to openly admit what was true all along. That is the real story here. Once the CBA was in place, the WNBA had to operate within a new financial reality that Clark helped create. The league now has better revenue structures, higher salary pathways, more leverage with partners, and a stronger commercial case than it had before. Those gains did not come out of nowhere. They came from a period where one player drove unusual levels of public attention and forced people who would ignore the league to finally look at it seriously. That does not mean nobody else contributed. It means the scale of Clark's contribution was different, and the numbers made that impossible to hide forever. This is why the Pat McAfee appearance mattered too. That audience is not a narrow WNBA fan base. It is broader sports media, the kind of space where women's basketball still has to fight for room and legitimacy in a lot of viewers' minds. Walking onto that platform and clearly saying Clark is the league's biggest star was not a casual compliment. It was a public repositioning in front of the exact audience that the WNBA still needs to keep winning over. That kind of statement is strategic, And the timing tells you the league understood it needed to sound different now than it did before. At this point, the evidence for Clark's centrality is overwhelming. When Indiana comes to town, teams see attendance jumps. When she plays, TV numbers rise. When she enters a market, sponsors and media talk differently. That is not ordinary star power. That is transformative market power. The league can talk about collective growth all it wants. And sure, the sport as a whole deserves credit for where it's going. But there's a difference between saying the league is growing and admitting what accelerated that growth into a whole different category. Clark accelerated it. That is also why the timing around officiating reform matters so much. For 2 years, the league got to enjoy the financial upside of Clark's presence, while often brushing past the governance problems surrounding her games. It got the ratings, the crowds, the headlines, the sponsor interest, and the cultural momentum. But eventually, the other side of that equation had to be addressed too. If the star bringing in all of that attention is also the player fans feel is not being properly protected, then the league cannot keep hiding behind slogans about rivalries and compelling content. At some point, it has to show that it can govern the moment it is profiting from. And that is what makes this whole development feel bigger than just one player. Clark is obviously at the center of it, but the consequences extend well beyond her. Better officiating transparency helps every player. Stronger review systems help every team. A commissioner finally speaking honestly about who the biggest star is helps the league sound more credible. A CBA shaped by real revenue growth helps the entire union. That is what makes the situation so important. Clark's impact may have forced a change, but the results do not stop with her. For the Fever, this all arrives at a huge time. Indiana heads into the next stage with Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Lexi Hull, and Sophie Cunningham in a league environment that is now more serious financially and, at least on paper, more accountable structurally. That matters because the Fever are no longer just a feel-good attendance story. They are trying to become a title contender in a league that is finally moving closer to the scale of the attention around them. Clark helped push the league into that environment, and now she gets to compete in it too. That may be the most ironic part of all. For a while, the league seemed hesitant to fully embrace what Clark represented because doing so meant admitting one player had changed the business. Now it is locked into a system that reflects exactly that reality. The new agreement is not just about salaries and expansion and scheduling. It is also a written acknowledgement that the WNBA is operating at a different level than it was before. And the person most clearly tied to that shift is the same person the commissioner spent too long trying not to center. So when fans ask why Kathy Engelbert is finally changing her tune, the answer is not complicated. She is changing it because the old tune no longer works. The money is different now. The attention is different now. The structure is different now. The league has a legal and financial framework that reflects growth it cannot plausibly separate from Caitlin Clark anymore. And with officiating reforms now built into a real agreement, the same league that once sounded content to let too much physicality slide is being forced to operate with more scrutiny. In other words, Clark did not just become the biggest star in the league. She became too big to keep minimizing. And once that happened, everything around her had to start changing.